All the way back in December, I built the O2 cube, a 3x3 on which all the corners were connected into a single cage, meaning the puzzle essentially looked like a large 1x1 with a circle on each face. Last week, I replaced the center stickers to be smaller, which made them less prone to catching on other puzzle pieces. This got me thinking, could I make a puzzle that looks the same, but turns like a mix-up cube? This would make it a lot more interesting to solve, as the O2 cube really doesn't require much effort to solve. I would call it the O4 cube, continuing the numbering scheme that the O2 cube created. Making such a puzzle out of a real mix-up cube would have been simply ridiculous, so I decided to create the simplest mechanism necessary for my goal. I really needed a slice mix-up cube and not a full-fledged mix-up cube. This allowed me to create a set of rails with the pieces hooked into the rails being equivalent to the equator layers of a mix-up cube. Some internal pieces were also necessary to provide stability to the centers, which are exactly the same as the edges mechanically. After the rails mechanism was done, I designed a cage that connects to the rails, and creates the appearance of the large 1x1 with a circle on each face that I'm going for. Then, after all the pieces were printed, I started building the O4 cube. Honestly, the 04 cube turned out better than I was expecting it to. The turning is very smooth, and it doesn't lock up nearly as much as I thought it would. Of course though, being a basic rails mechanism, occasional lockups are inevitable. Using a rails mechanism also means that the puzzle's corner cutting ability is minimal. That's actually not too annoying when you're trying to solve it, because there aren't that many pieces, and it's also reasonably easy to align them properly. I also want to note that the two halves of the cage are not actually glued together, and they're also not glued to the inner rails mechanism. Everything simply snapped together, and the angles of the connections mean there's really no chance of it coming apart on its own. However, if I really needed to disassemble it, I could force it back apart, since it's actually not superglued at all. It's kind of funny that this rails mechanism puzzle actually turns better than the original 02 cube, which used a mass-produced 3x3 inside. It really shows how inefficient the 02 cube's usage of space was, and that it would have been better off as a fully original puzzle rather than a 3x3 extension mod. Overall, I'm pretty happy that I made the 04 cube, since it preserves the 02 cube's aesthetic, but is more of an actual challenge to solve, which I appreciate. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and scramble the puzzle. Alright, I'd say now's a pretty good time to get started with solving the 04 cube. Now, to understand what this basically is, imagine you have this mix-up cube, and you can only turn the middle layers. You can turn the middle layer on any axis and to any stop, but you can only turn the middle layers, which basically means that all of the corners stay together and they also stay in the same position. I've tried solving a mix-up cube this way, and it's actually not the most difficult thing in the world, but I do believe that the fact that around half or slightly more of all the pieces are obscured at one point is going to make this a lot harder. That's why the 02 cube was actually a little bit of a challenge, because you couldn't actually get your bearings very easily. So I'm going to do the first basic logical step, which is just to get all of the centers back in their correct position. And then we can worry about all of the edges. So let's see how this turns out. Alright, so I finished solving all of the centers, and doing that actually reminded me of a property this puzzle has that I forgot to mention. Basically, when I was solving this using only the middle layers, I noticed that opposite pieces always stay opposite. For example, this edge and this edge are always opposites. No matter what I try doing to them, they're always going to be in opposite positions. And I think that is going to make this solve significantly less frustrating, just because there's that little bit of geometry that makes it so that when I put this yellow here, I thought I was going to have to still solve this white, but it was already there. So that was a nice little attribute of the puzzle that I actually forgot about till just now. Anyway, the puzzle's solved. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day. Alright, fine, let's solve all the edges. This is gonna take... I actually have no idea how long it's gonna take, because I've never solved it like this. But I guess that's what the first solve is for. I don't really have a direction on this. I'm just gonna time-lapse whatever I'm gonna do next and tell you how it turned out and what I actually ended up doing. Alright, after a bit of fiddling around, I have gotten the green and red edge into its correct slot between the green and red pieces. And by the properties of this puzzle, that means the blue and orange is also in. Wow, it feels like I'm actually getting somewhere. That's honestly surprising to me. But yeah, so now that that's done, I guess I'll just try solving it more. I really don't have much of a plan for this. Oh yeah, and in case it isn't clear, even though all of the pieces on this puzzle are equivalent, I'm going to call the single sticker pieces centers and the double sticker pieces edges, just to preserve my sanity as well as yours, because that's what I'm used to calling these. That's what they are on the Mixup Cube, and calling it anything else would just require more effort than I'm willing to put in right now in this solve. Alright, after a bit of mucking about, I've gotten 3 total edge pairs done. There's the green and red, which we got done earlier, and the one behind it. There's now the red and blue, which is oriented incorrectly, but I'm not worrying about that now. Right now I just want to get them into their correct places. And finally there is the... what's his face? The yellow and red, which is also oriented incorrectly. And you can cheat and just do that because the mechanism isn't perfect, but it's like, what's the point of cheating on this puzzle if I'm solving it for the first time? And plus, when I was solving this, I actually found a way to orient all of the edges correctly without too much of a fuss, so I think I'm just gonna apply that set of moves at the end. Alright, let's take a quick recap of what we need to do. We need to solve this, this, and this by extension, and this. Okay. So to summarize, we're nowhere near done and there's still plenty of edges that need to be switched, so I'll get back to it. Alright, so finally all of the edges are in their correct spots. You have no idea how long it took me to get to this place. It took a really long time, and honestly, I feel it's kind of a similar effect to the latch cube, which is basically the first time you do it, you have a really hard time figuring everything out. But then once you kind of figure out the trick to it, you can do it relatively easily every time. And I feel that, honestly, this operates quite similarly. I learned some very interesting techniques during that part of the solve. Alright, so the final thing I have to do is... what was it? Yes, I have to orient the edges. This one's already oriented. This one isn't, so yeah, it's fairly simple. All I have to do is use a simple algorithm to turn all of these, and just to make it a bit more clear what I'm actually doing, I'll do it on this instead of this. So let's see. This isn't even actually solved, but I'll just show you the basic method. What you do is you bring the edge you want to turn up to the top layer, then you bring its slot over to where it's properly oriented when you bring it down, and you bring it down. And generally you have to do the same with another edge on the same axis so that you don't mess up anything else. This also means that this algorithm only works for pairs of edges on the same axis, so I'm absolutely screwed if I were to have to turn this and this. But through the magic of this not being the puzzle I'm making a video on, I don't have to worry about that. So yeah, I'll just do all that to this puzzle, and then I'll close out my thoughts on it. Alright, so with that, the 04 cube is finally done being solved. I'm gonna be completely honest, I knew from the outset that this was going to be a challenge, but this thing still shocked me with how hard it actually was. I was not expecting it to be this difficult to solve. I doubt this will ever be available on Chewy's Custom Puzzle Store, but if you do ever find yourself with one of these and you're frustrated, take a deep breath, work it out on the Mixup Cube, and you'll get through it. And then once you get the trick of how to solve this, it'll be much easier for all of your future solves, and a lot more fun, I'd imagine. But that's really all I have to say about this puzzle. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a great afternoon.